We can start. Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to all of you to today's session. My name is Luisa Fuso. I'm here on behalf of Ofcom, and we're very, very proud to host today's event jointly with the Royal Economic Society and the Diversity and Inclusion Network. In my role here at Ofcom as Chief Economist and having just completed 5 years on the Council of the Royal Economic Society, I have always been a very, very strong promoter of equity, diversity, and inclusion. And these themes are very much at the heart of what we do here at Ofcom. We're very conscious that as a regulator, we are in a very privileged position, and we want to make sure that every policy we design and whenever we intervene in markets, we reflect the diversity of the communities that we impact, and that we are conscious of the impact we are making for very different type of people and citizens and communities. At the same time, as an employer, diversity and inclusion is very much at the heart of what we do internally in our processes, and we strive to improve them and to learn from all of you, from all practices that seem to be working elsewhere. We've introduced a number of different initiatives, and certainly we try and have diversity and inclusion at the very front of our mind when we have recruiting policies that try and, again, benefit from all the different contributions from different communities and therefore different candidates. So we're also a very proud employer that receives active contribution by our employees' networks. So we have a number of networks that reflect different communities as well as sponsors or affiliates or people who just like to support. So we've got Women Network, Religion Network, which includes also people of different faiths as well as no faith at all, or Ethnic Diversity Network. It goes on, Parents and Carers, as well as social inclusion. And I am very proud to be the sponsor and the champion of social inclusion on behalf of the senior management team here at Ofcom. So when it comes to our own group as economics and analytics, we are therefore very much trying to reflect on the learnings from all the networks as well as our own experience as professionals. And we've been trying to introduce a different number of measures, again, to keep promoting diversity amongst our economists and data and financial analysts. You're going to hear about some of these initiatives today from my colleagues. We're trying to promote psychological safety as well as, having initiatives from women, initiatives on mentoring on different race and ethnicities. So, of course, none of us has got the perfect formula to make sure that we achieve our goals, and we can always try to learn from each other, and this is very much the purpose of today. And I'm also particularly pleased to see that the theme of today is intersectionality, which is a theme which is not very often discussed. So with that, I am delighted to welcome Professor Giovanni Razzu from Reading University, as well as Diversity, Inclusion and Professional Conduct Lead on the Royal Economic Society Trustee Board. So I hope you enjoyed the event, and thank you very much for coming.
Oh, thank you very much, Luisa. Thanks for the introduction, and a warm welcome to everyone from the Royal Economic Society. This is, I think, the 7th network event we are running, the 3rd in person. Can you hear me? Yes? Yeah, the 3rd in person, and event of the Diversity and Inclusion Network, of which I will tell you a bit more in a moment. So we are extremely grateful to Ofcom for hosting us and for the great hospitality that you have provided today, because really it's events like this and the support that you can offer us in these cases that ensure that we develop, we improve, and we make further progress on the work on diversity and inclusion. About which really the Royal Economic Society is very much involved. In fact, where this is coming from in terms of the Royal Economic Society. The Royal Economic Society has got 4 strategic objective, and one of these 4 strategic objectives is about improving diversity, inclusion, and integrity in the profession. And this objective, of which we are extremely keen on, is also essential and integral to achieving the other 3 objectives we have, one of which, for instance, is to ensure that we develop opportunities for economists from different professions and backgrounds to meet. And this is another important way today, for instance, in which we can do that. So again, we are very grateful to the Ofcom for this, and do ensure that you make the most of this event, not just in terms of developing your understanding and about equality and diversity, but also, of course, about developing networks and relationship and partnerships. So I mentioned about the key strategic objective of the Royal Economic Society in terms of improving diversity, inclusion, and integrity in the profession. The way we do at the Royal Economic Society, we do that is through 4 pillars or groups of themes. And one of these is very much the Diversity and Inclusion Network, which is behind the work this event today. And is key integral to this work, and I'm extremely grateful to the team that works behind the scenes behind these, the team within RES, led fantastically by Maria Luisa there, but also to the chair of the Diversity and Inclusion Network, Estefania Paredes Fuentes, who will hear a bit more in a moment. Really, I want to emphasize the point in this, because, I mean, they do a fantastic work, and this work that is driven really by a sense of duty more than anything else. You know, there's no, to use an economic term, there's no much utilitarian reward out of this. They do really from a sense of duty, which, by the way, is very rational in economics as well. Is not irrational to do things driven by a sense of duty. So it's fantastic, and that work, tireless work, has also led to a new, for instance, partnership, which we are extremely proud of, with Frontier Economics. There are some representative Frontier Economics today with us, but we are very proud to have developed this partnership specifically on equality and diversity, and is a partnership that will provide, quite important, substantial support for us to ensure that we make further progress on this agenda and on the objective of improving diversity and equality in the profession that I've mentioned a moment ago. So just briefly a bit more about the event. Luisa very much mentioned the topic about intersectionality, and I think this is extremely important for various reasons. One, you can refer and you can think about the kind of political environment we are living and the kind of backlash that we are experiencing on equality and diversity in many ways. You may have heard, for instance, I'm not sure about it's happening in the UK, but I'm sure in other countries such as Italy, France, and Germany, that, for instance, many organizations have been contacted by the US administration, for instance, to ensure that they don't have equality and diversity policies if they want to apply for contracts and programs, grants in the US. So there is a kind of backlash about the agenda that really we are experiencing. And this is important. The intersectionality work, I think, is very important in this respect for one aspect I will mention in a moment. The other, of course, is the evidence that we know about. Quite a few or a lot of you will be, economists working in a policy environment. And you know that often policies are based really on averages. That's what a lot of the policies are directed by. The gender pay gap is an average gap in pay between men and women. And of course, a lot of that reference is based, of policies I mentioned are based on these averages. But we know that there is quite a lot of variation around averages. And therefore, as policymakers, but not only as policymakers, it's very much about to understand that variation around averages. And we know that variation is substantial in many domains, in many areas. And so understanding that really requires, an intersectional approach. Really requires understanding gender, how gender, for instance, interacts with other socioeconomic variables. Going back to the backlash, political backlash I mentioned earlier on, I think that intersectionality is also very important in that respect for a simple reason, is that, often that backlash, as you may have read, is based on, pitching one group against another. But once you adopt an intersectional approach, you move beyond that single group focus, which is still very important, to understand that we have different multiple identities, that many characteristics, socioeconomic characteristics are important for many of us. And therefore, it helps actually to address that backlash in substantial way, I believe. So I think that this intersectional focus today is extremely relevant, extremely important for the equality and diversity agenda, for the strategy in the Royal Economic Society, and I believe, as Luisa mentioned, also for Ofcom in this particular case. So today we really aim to open this conversation about intersectionality and economics, and we have a fantastic program, a fantastic panel of speakers, starting with a panel discussion on intersectionalities and the future of economics, which I've mentioned. And then we have opportunities to really going deep into some specific areas, specific topics with 4 breakout sessions. As you mentioned, the first one, for instance, is about intersectionality between class and economics, and then we have about teaching economics and so on and so forth. So that's the outline program there. And I'm again extremely grateful to all those who are contributing, whether chairing the session or giving their own views. So finally, I really would like to reiterate a point which is very important that I think also Luisa mentioned in her introduction earlier on about, we don't get everything right. There are various opportunities to improve. In the same spirit, I mean, this is not a space where we know that we're doing everything perfectly. It's a space really to share challenges. So no one is doing, things perfectly, and therefore we do request that every participants treat everybody else with respect, because the aim really of this network to provide an opportunity to share experiences and to learn from each other. So thank you very much again. Thanks to Ofcom and everyone, and I will hand over to Steffi for the rest. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. So I really have some boring bits to do, so no worries. But one is just remind you all the REST Code of Conduct. So we are here. As we say, we are committed to quality, diversity, and we expect that in all our events to have a positive environment. As Giovanni, as Luisa said, we are all learning. We know that this is not easy. We are sharing challenges, and we would like just to share all this. We want to do this in an environment of respect. So we want that everybody to be able to share their thoughts, everybody to respect each other. Remember, if you have to challenge not the person, challenge the thoughts. And just do that if you ask questions from a point of genuine concern or a genuine interest, curiosity, but not like I shouldn't tell it, but let's avoid being. Economists are well known for perhaps sometimes for being a bit too challenging. Let's put it in this way. And of course, if you do need to make a complaint, we have a code of conduct. So just let us know or go to the website. So. As a chair of the sessions, to our chairs in the various groups, I do ask you to kind of be active and do challenge any individual behavior, but anyone can do that. In the room, feel free that you can do that. As a participant, as I told you before, ask questions from a point of very respectful and from genuine curiosity. So without further ado, no, sorry, one more thing. I got the housekeeping notes. So few things, the usual things. No fire alarm today. So we're not expecting a fire alarm today or a fire drill. So if you do hear the fire alarm, please do follow people with the red lanyard around the room, and they will lead you to the right exit. If you do need to use the toilets, you can head back upstairs, and at the end of the corridor, you will see the toilets. And we will be having some breakout sessions. I'm going to explain more about it in a little bit, so no worries about it. And we are going to have colleagues from Ofcom leading you to those sessions as well. So that's great. And of course, we will be taking pictures today, and this will be published on the REST website, social media. If you do prefer not to appear in any of the pictures, please let us know. You can talk to Cecilia. You can see the one with the camera taking the pictures. And yes, let her know. I think those were my housekeeping as well. So without further ado, I invite our panelists to join us. And we will have Karen, Ben, and Alex. Robin, sorry, I call you Ben. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you for sharing. As I said, they're going to share their experiences, the research, the work that they are doing. Hopefully, we all get a little bit out of it. Intersectionality, as kind of Giovanni said, sometimes it can be a difficult topic to talk about. Difficult to balance as well. We try really hard in the network to kind of keep an eye on all the different sets of diversity, because we know it goes, I'm not just a woman, but I bring my background, I bring all my experiences, I'm an immigrant, I am a non-white person, and many other things. And so sometimes kind of it comes to the people's identity, and we identify in completely different ways as well. So it's important to kind of, when we talk about diversity, when we talk about policies, to keep this in mind, to keep that the idea that the identity of one person doesn't limit to one specific characteristic, but is much broader. But of course, this can be very challenging as well. And at the network, we are very proud that we have taken up this challenge, and we really try all the time to bring up more and more aspects and to have these conversations. At least, as I say, we might not have the solution, but that's why we put you all here together to kind of think about this, keep talking, keep the conversation going, especially in particular in these challenging times, because we know that we are living very challenging times. We know that there are some groups that are being criminalized at the moment, that are being marginalized at the moment, not just in economics, but in our society. So let's make the most that economics actually has a huge impact in our societies, and that we can do something. Let's make the most of that impact that we have in the society to just, of course, change our discipline. I always love, because in these environments, if this were economics, it would be amazing. It's kind of very diverse, but we know that it is not out there. But we can get there. And that's, I always say, let's keep these meetings positive, because we are the people trying to make this change happening. So let's keep it positive. And without that, we have brought you here 3 amazing panelists. I think we're going to start. I'm going to have one question for each of the panelists. They have been prepared in advance, but then we're going to open the questions for the public. So this is going to be and open debate. So I'm going to start with Karen. Karen Santrien-Kufour. Karen is currently a senior associate policy at payment system regulator, but Karen has covered many roles. She has moved from the private sector into academia into the regulation. So she has a lot of experience. And in fact, Karen, to these experiences, I know because I know you, you bring your own identity, your perspective, and you try to contribute to change the culture, or at least to create a more inclusive culture wherever you go. So the question for you, how can thinking about intersecting identities help employers create a more genuinely inclusive environment for economies?
Okay, thank you, Steffi. Thanks so much. It's great to be here. So will I start? I think, as my academia training would say, you start off with the definition. So what is intersectionality? I know it was Kimberly Crenshaw that first coined the phrase when, as a legal scholar, she was looking at the intersection or the relationship or the double whammy of possible discrimination faced by Black women in America. So yes, that's where it started. We've now a couple of decades now from when she first coined the phrase. And I think the best way of actually thinking about intersectionality is to kind of just bring it back to ourselves. I always think, bring it back and make it personal. So we all have multiple roles, and hence we all have multiple identities. So that's, to me, that's the starting point of the intersectionality. So, I mean, even here, like, okay, so you'll have jobs. You could be a parent. I mean, okay, how many people here have more than 2 roles in terms of defining themselves? Exactly, right. More than 3 roles. More than 5 roles. Yeah, and so that's where we are. So when you look at intersectionality and, you know, what should it be considered in an environment, in a workplace, to make it more inclusive? Well, every individual, if you want to get the best out of them, and as economists, we're always thinking about efficiency and social well-being and social welfare, we need to be thinking about intersectionality, because we all have multiple identities, we all have multiple roles, and at any point that could create a corner, right, and a sticky point. So if you want to get the best out of everybody, it's something that needs to be considered and thought about. So that's the sort of the starting point. I mean, I think in terms of intersectionality, inclusion is, you know, just making sure that policies are inclusive enough. So when you're doing your appraisal, you're actually you know, comparing like for like. If you're doing a performance, you think that you've given that person the best opportunity to do the best that they can do. And surely that's going to be better for everyone, not just that employee, but it's going to be just better for social well-being, just to include, to make sure we're creating a socially inclusive space. And isn't it also just about empathy? Isn't it just about understanding somebody else's journey? So even as I spent, so as Steffi said, I started off working in commodities. So I started off as an analyst. I then went more into sort of an analyst. I was in publishing. So I was a metals analyst first, and then I went into, I was a commodities editor for The Economist. Then after that, I worked for non-governmental organization. So I moved from there, then I went into academia, and I spent the majority of the time in academia. I was in academia for 20 years before I made a career change 2 years ago. I tried to be a freelance economist. Oh, I can't knock on too many doors there, I think. I don't know if it was the intersection, what was going on there, but those were kind of like, oh, a lot of doors shut. And then I landed in financial regulation, where I am now. So I've had real breadth in terms of moving about. But, you know, ultimately, in terms of my experience, I would say that, you know, everywhere presented bottlenecks. I think it depends on, it's been a case of how I've chosen to respond to it. So, and I think I'd even go back before I talk about, in terms of the roles, I'd go back even to when I first thought about taking economics as a subject. So when I first thought about taking economics as a subject, Number one, it was only because physics was being taught at a school that had a bad reputation, and I had to find another A level. Then I came across this thing called economics. Oh, what's this about? And it sounded interesting. I was right about that. And I was told, I went to an all-girls school, that was it. And I was told by the person who was advising me at the time, they told me that no girl has ever got higher than a C in this subject. Are you sure you want to do this? Well, number one, I mean, I think for the majority of people, that might have been a really bad thing to say. And I thought, no girl's ever got more than a C. I can get more than a C. And I am going to do it and give it a try. And I did get more than a C, obviously. But jokes aside, that is a barrier. That perception of what subjects are for girls, what subjects are. So I'm the kind of person that is kind of like, okay, you put a barrier there, that's giving me an incentive. Look, I've got another hurdle to come over, or try and kick it down or whatever. Not everybody's like that. And those barriers will be real barriers. So for me, in my journey, I've tried to break the mold. I've tried to break down those barriers. So I will try and step out of my comfort zone sometimes, just to be that person that represented, that was there. I was in the room. I was part of that decision. I was on the panel. It may not necessarily, and certainly at one point it really wasn't. I was the child at school that used to stammer. I don't know how I became a lecturer. I really don't. Now you can't shut me up. So, things can change. But I've always tried to step in that space and also feedback. So currently now I've taken on mentoring. So part of the civil service race forum, I've taken on a mentee. For all my time when I was in academia, I've always tried to think about how the students felt. And when I say that, what I mean is that intersection between, you've come, what your journey to get to that door, where you're actually at university, is probably going to be very different than mine, will be different than yours, will be different than yours, and taking that into consideration. I think it took me a while to do that. I'm really sorry for all those other students that I was really harsh at when I first joined, academia, and thought, no, you just haven't got it in on time, or you just haven't done this. But everyone's journey is so different. Yes, we need to have standards, and I'm not saying that we don't need to have standards, but I think that when it comes to, if you really want to take on board inclusion and diversity and equality, is equality of opportunity. So we need to put into place those things that can make that happen. And I've tried to do that in the sense of getting myself into that space, sticking it out when it may have been difficult, and trying to help those, being a friend, being a peer, not only just looking forward, but also looking behind. Who can I help to come along with me on that journey? Who can I help to advise? So, that's how I've kind of played it. Stories about other barriers. How am I doing for time? Is it 2 minutes? Okay. So I tell a story about the barrier in terms of economics. I think other barriers, centers around stereotypes again, which means that even when you get in that place, you've got to make sure you're A+ to secure yourself there and to move forward. And again, I think as well, by getting into that space, by increasing representation, you start to change. That starts the engine of change. So, as I said, I've always tried to, I think you've got to back yourself as well. Back yourself. Step out of your comfort zone, and try and make that change, and be the change you want to see. I remember a friend of mine sort of said to me after the Obama elections and the elections and the results, and he said to me that never again will we walk into a room, into a meeting, and someone asks, "Are you in the right place?" It's like, no, yes, I am in the right place. Yes, I'm meant to be here. And I think that's something that I've always sort of said, no, no matter how uncomfortable I'm feeling, I am meant to be here. And the fact that I'm here is not only just good for me, it's just good. And by being here, sometimes you don't even need to say anything. You're just there. You don't know how it's impacting others, how much it's encouraging others. And that's again why I've always liked to work also with schools. So the FCA where I'm at the PSR, but we work in conjunction with the FCA because we're a subsidiary. So the programs we do with schools are all FCA programs. So I've always gone in and been involved with those. Discover economics in terms of what you're doing. You know, I've always been a champion there in terms of what's happening there. I just think, you know, you can only break down those stereotypes by changing the narrative. And you can only do that by writing a narrative, by being the narrative, by being that action. I think that's generally where I've tried to steer.
Thank you very much, Karen. Thank you. A lot to take, but we move first to all the panelists. We listen from the panelists once and we open for questions afterwards. So hold your questions. Now we go to Robin. Robin, so sorry I called you Ben before, but Robin Feiner from Ofcom. And Robin, at Ofcom, you have been working on creating a psychologically safe and inclusive environment for diverse and intersected backgrounds. So I guess I found it that fascinating when we were talking, changing emails about this, because I think if we want to kind of think about intersectionality, sometimes you can't think about every single aspect. But yeah, you're right. You can think about a space where everybody feels psychologically safe. So I guess my question for you is, why psychological safety particularly important when thinking about intersectionality? What practical steps have worked well for you? And perhaps what are the most pressing challenges you have found so far? Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much. And thanks for inviting me to speak today. So, I mean, I think before diving in and focusing on psychological safety in particular, it's probably useful to build on what Karen and others have said about understanding why it's important to understand intersecting backgrounds if you're going to try and create a truly inclusive working culture. So if we want to get the best out of the diverse talent within our group at Ofcom, and make it a great place to work, we need to recognise that diversity is a very complex issue. And in thinking about this, I thought it might be useful to break it down into two areas. So the first is structural diversity, and thinking about the representation in the profession and addressing sort of systematic barriers to entry for different groups. That's the sort of big level, the high level. But then there's the diversity of individual experiences, and Karen captured it well by saying we all come with many hats to work and to life, and everyone has these unique experiences which probably don't fully align with broad categories that they're grouped into. And so individuals may well identify with aspects of certain categories, but not fit neatly within those categories. So in order to address the structural challenges, of having a properly diverse workplace, I think it's essential to focus on some quite broad categories. So, for example, as has already been said today, we know that there are too few women and socially disadvantaged people entering the economics profession. And there was an article over the weekend about comments by Claire Lombardelli, who's a Deputy Governor at the Bank of England, precisely discussing this. And in order to address this, you can take some quite targeted measures, such as ensuring that economics is offered as a subject in schools in less advantaged areas where it currently really is not being offered. But broad categories can be somewhat blunt instruments. While they do help to address representation, they can overlook nuanced differences within a group. So individuals within the same category are likely to have vastly different experiences. And furthermore, some issues that affect a particular group may also be felt and experienced by individuals outside of that group. So that brings us to the role of intersectionality. And thinking that broad categories may not be the best approach for fostering an inclusive culture, because we need to recognise that the way in which different aspects of identity overlap adds complexity. And I think, again, repeating some of what Karen said, you know, Black women are likely to face different workplace challenges from those experienced by white women or by Black men. And that becomes even more complicated and intricate when you take into account socioeconomic background, religion, other considerations. Being placed into a broad category can lead to assumptions that everyone in a group is experiencing the same issues, and it can amplify rather than resolve biases. To build a truly inclusive workplace, we really have to recognise these overlapping identities and avoid simplifying people's experiences. So now I will go on to psychological safety finally. I think, we feel here, that one of the most powerful ways to create an inclusive culture is to foster psychological safety. And it can absolutely complement structural diversity measures by encouraging all employees to be able to feel free to speak up, to share their experiences, and to express their needs. It's crucial because it benefits everyone, regardless of their background. If we can establish a workplace where colleagues feel valued and respected, then this is really foundational to building an inclusive culture. A psychologically safe environment enables diversity of thought. It allows different voices and perspectives to be heard. When employees feel safe to speak up, they are more likely to improve their own experiences in the workplace, but also the experiences of those around them. So in terms of what we've been doing at Ofcom within our group, so we've got a group of over 100 economists and analysts, is that we first of all had a session where we learned about psychological safety and we discussed what it meant to us as a group. And that led to the development of a team charter, and that is a collectively creative and collectively owned charter about how we will behave in the workplace towards each other. We then made sure that we had some feedback mechanisms. It's not just a one-off, let's create this document and move on to the next initiative. So we had a temperature check survey where we, a few months later, sort of asked for feedback for what difference was being made, whether people did feel that we do have a psychologically safe environment. And also we have a regular staff survey that captures sentiment in this area. We're also planning some leadership sessions to explore how leaders within the group can actively promote psychological safety and make sure that it lives on. But to your question on challenges, there is still a lot of work to do. We need to ensure that the Charter remains relevant and widely understood. A key challenge is ensuring that every colleague feels a genuine sense of ownership and that leaders, including me, consistently reinforce the right tone. If we succeed in embedding psychological safety, it will create a virtuous circle. So if we're seen to be walking the walk, it will lead to a general assumption of goodwill in the workplace. And people can occasionally say the wrong thing, and they can take sensible risks, but they can learn from that rather than staying quiet for fear of the consequences. This should all enable us to then be ever more understanding of others' perspectives and appreciative of what they contribute.
Thank you very much, Robin. Again, a lot of food for thought. I'm going to come back to you on a few points, but let's now go to Felix. And Felix is an associate professor of organizational behavior at University College London. So Felix is not an economist, but his research is... But his research is actually super interesting. It explores how members of dominant groups respond to increasing diversity, what strategies work on that. And of course, I couldn't find like a better way to bring Felix here to talk about these things, because this is kind of what we are. We know that there is a dominant group in economics. We know that we need more strategies sometimes to work with this group. So my question for you, Felix, is, what strategies have you found to be effective in sustaining change and avoiding backlash? And what advice would you give to those working to embed lasting cultural change in economic, whether university or general institutions that recruit economists? Felix.
Yeah. So first, I just want to say thank you, not just for the invitation to be here, but for this event happening, everyone in the room. As you can tell from my accent, I grew up and worked for many years in the United States. And I can't tell you how many colleagues I have who regularly speak at events like this, have conferences based on this, research grants, and it's all being canceled at the moment. So seeing this press on here is really heartening and valuable. So I want to start with that. But yeah, as mentioned, I've spent kind of well over a decade now researching backlash to diversity. From a psychological perspective, I'm a social psychologist by training, with a lot of emphasis on trying to understand at kind of a conceptual level, like, why do people push back against this concept of diversity? And so we want to understand how we can navigate that challenge. I think it's important to understand what drives that backlash. And as you can imagine, it's something that's multiply determined, right? There's multiple reasons why people push back against diversity. One set of reasons concerns like material resources. I'm concerned that I won't have access to a job. I'm not going to get this promotion I think I deserve, right? And I think that's a valid explanation, one that gets a lot of airtime. And the way we've been addressing it until now, I think works to a degree, but needs some improvement. And that's really been a focus on what's called the business case for diversity, right? Like, diversity, if managed well, can increase profits for organizations, get us working better, help us be more creative, right? It's a compelling argument backed by research, and it's gotten the foot in the door for a lot of diversity efforts. But I think what we're seeing now with rapid scaling back of these efforts in the United States is how fragile that argument is. And so I don't have very clear recommendations. I think we're collectively navigating, like, how are we repackaging and selling people on the idea of DEI, right? In the United States, you can't use the term DEI anymore. We'll be using different language in a few months. We're sorting that out, right? But I think we need to look beyond the business case for diversity. In the opening remarks, you talked about this sense of duty for this, that this is something that speaks to our sense of justice, what's right in the world. And I think that's an argument we need to strengthen, along with just better educating people about why these efforts are needed. Why, if you want to hire the best person for the job, DEI efforts are how you get there, not the absence of them. So I think there's a lot of work to do in terms of addressing people's kind of material fears. But what I'd most like to talk about today, and it's something I don't think gets enough attention, is people's fears around identity. So just as a quick exercise, I'd like you all to just picture a firefighter. Who came to mind? Chances are, if you're like most people, it was a man rather than a woman, perhaps white rather than a person of color, heterosexual, cisgender, non-disabled. Right? We have this expectation about what a firefighter looks like, right? What psychologists call this expectation, this mental image, is a prototype. Okay, and we have these for kind of every category, right? Any concept really, you get a prototype. You think about a bird, right? Probably like a robin or a sparrow pop to mind, less likely an ostrich or a penguin. Ostriches, penguins, they're birds too, but they're less birdy than a sparrow or a robin, right? And so when we're thinking about social categories, like professions or membership to an organization, we have the same dynamics at play. We have the people who are kind of an automatic easy fit, like, yes, that person is exactly what I expect a firefighter to look like. They have kind of all the appearance and all the traits. And then people who are not such a natural fit, right? They come from a background that's underrepresented. And then suddenly they're in this position where, they're marginalized. They're a bit of an outsider, right? They kind of have to prove themselves. And I think we've all had experiences where we felt like an insider. We show up, we're just ourselves. We're not thinking about our identities, the hats we wear, right? But we also all have experiences being this outsider, showing up in a place where suddenly your identity is a bit of a liability, right? People are judging you on the basis of that. So these prototypes, these expectations that we have about who belongs in a certain space are really, really impactful. And they have a direct and fundamental role in who feels inclusion and who doesn't, okay? So inclusion, it gets defined in many ways. The definition I like to use is a focus on what's called perceived inclusion, which is if you look across the individuals in an organization, how much do they feel a simultaneous sense of belonging, that they belong there, but also authenticity, okay? If you're prototypical, you fit the template, you fit people's expectation, you show up to work and you get to be yourself and you feel this automatic sense of belonging, and that feels good. If you don't fit that template, however, you're showing up to work and you're forced into this trade-off between belonging and authenticity, right? I can be myself and be marginalized, or I can change who I am, try and conform, try and be more like the prototype. Maybe I'll get some belonging that way, but it comes at the cost of authenticity, feeling like myself. And so we can see how these templates, right, these prototypes, these expectations we hold cause a lot of barriers. They're at the core of why we struggle to achieve inclusion. And there's good news and bad news about this being kind of a fundamental source of inequality within organizations, right? I'll start with the bad news. The bad news is when you're prototypical, right? You match that template, that feels good, and you want to defend that. So a lot of backlash comes from a fear that I'm an insider now, with more diversity, I might feel like an outsider. I might have to be the one who conforms to someone else's expectations. That drives, in my research I found, drives a lot of the backlash we see, kind of beyond these material concerns. The other bad news is that these expectations, these prototypes, are inevitable and essential. They're actually very useful. If you think about your organizations, right, many of you are probably in leadership roles, you're doing things like hiring, promotions, the criteria you put on what am I looking for in an employee here, what am I looking for in a leader, that's capturing your prototype, that's capturing these expectations. And organizations require these in order to run, right? We need to have and need to give employees these sets of expectations. We need to have an image of what a good employee looks like. So we're stuck with these prototypes, but they don't have to be quite as narrow as we often settle for. Oftentimes, they just kind of encapsulate who's the dominant group, right? Firefighters, cisgender, heterosexual, white men, non-disabled, right? But there's plenty of people who don't match that template who can succeed in that context. And so we want to think about, and this is just pure fortune, how we can break the mold, how we can take this template, this prototype, and expand it. Okay, we can't get rid of it. We can't trade one mold for another mold. That's just going to create more problems. We need to open the door. Okay, we need to make it more expansive. And so one way to do that is just think about, what are all the things that are expected of members of your organizations? What does it mean to be an economist in people's minds? And how many of those things, if they're not directly encoding membership to particular groups, like a white man, are doing so indirectly, right? So if you say, we're looking for someone who's very assertive and confident and agentic, gender stereotypes mean that's basically saying you're looking for a man, right? You know, women obviously break those stereotypes all the time, but they receive backlash for doing so, and they're always pushing up against that hill. So again, it's about reevaluating the criteria we use and trying to broaden them. And one piece of evidence, a story I can share, is research I did with a collaborator, Corinne Bendersky, with firefighters in the United States. We spent over a year talking with firefighters, men and women firefighters, and it was very clear men firefighters enjoy this kind of automatic sense of belonging because they're who you picture. Women firefighters constantly having to prove themselves. Big, big barrier to gender diversity in that context. How was this enforced? Through their practices. Okay? A lot of the formal and informal practices of assessing who belongs, who gets in and gets ahead, were based on characteristics that are stereotypically masculine: physical strength, stamina, decisiveness. All things you want in a firefighter. Not about getting rid of those. But what was interesting was that we found firefighters also valued, they recognized as crucially important, stereotypically feminine traits: compassion, empathy, caring. A lot of what they do is provide care on the job. A lot of what they do is provide support networks for each other. They're each other's second families. But that wasn't in their evaluation practices at all. Right? They were subtly devaluing aspects of the job that are really essential. And so we ran an experiment with some participating fire departments, and we got them to think about, reflect on the importance of compassion and empathy, these stereotypically feminine traits. And what that did was it loosened this association they had. It didn't remove it, but it loosened this association between being a firefighter and being a man in a way that then led to reduced bias against women firefighters, recognizing women firefighters as more capable. And so this is one of those situations where this is all complex, right? There's no one-size-fits-all solution, but I'd really encourage you all to go back to your organizations and think not just about the people, right? How do we help these people succeed, but about your practices that are potentially reinforcing a very narrow prototype. And how can you expand this, right? How can you open the doors? There's a lot more I can say about this, but my guess is I'm at or over time, and I'd love to hear your questions. But yeah, I hope that answered the question and stimulates some conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Felix. And yes, let's open for questions from the public. So let's do this. We collect a couple of questions, 2 or 3. I also would like you to say your name and the institution that you are representing, and then we open to all the speakers. So we have one question here and one question over there.
My name's Graham Taylor. Hi, guys.
Hey.
Really lovely speeches, really important speeches. So I think it's important for intersectionality of economics also that we have a time structure. I'm by the way, from London Metropolitan University. I have a degree in sociology and a master's in political violence and radicalisation. I just wanted to talk to Karen. My question based on what she said about intersectionality and the way in which we have different roles in society to play. Just out of interest, Karen, do you think time is also important and structure? Because I think the more roles we have, if we have a structured day, we can always fulfill those roles if we know the times we're to get to our destinations and the times we have to leave. And also the sociality side of it is very important too. Do you think so? Because we need to keep the social side of it, and diversity is very important. I think diversity is an extremely important factor in the way we all live, and all 3 of you have expressed that very well. And I think, I think when you said you felt undermined in a place, you felt nervous going into a place. Why should you feel nervous? After all, we're all the same creed. We're all the same type of person. We all have personalities. We all have feelings. We all have contextual emotions. So why should you feel that way? I think it's disgusting to even suggest that people can treat you that way.
Thank you. Let's get Joe's question. Thank you very much, Joe. Is there any other question particular for Felix before we? So sorry, we take a team's question and then we come back for the second round of questions. Thank you.
Okay, sorry, my name is Tim Burnett from Aston University. I was really struck, Felix, by what you talked about in terms of prototypes, but the idea that individuals might self-identify as not fitting a prototype, which then affects their sense of belonging or their sense of the ability to be authentic. And I've been really concerned for a while about the very broad, the bluntness of a lot of categorizations, the BAME like marker as a very, very blunt instrument, which often I think doesn't really hit the target very well. And I don't know whether or not having these really blunt instruments might also, in a way, have a negative impact on people's sense that they belong or their self-identity, you know, by fitting within such a broad range of things, whether or not actually it's almost counterproductive. I don't know, but something to discuss.
Thank you very much. So we got 3 questions now, luckily enough, in one each and in the same order. So you want to take the question, Karen, first about time and structure?
Okay, so hello, is that working?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I understand in terms of what you're saying in terms of time and structure. I think that is actually the essence of intersectionality. So if we go back to a period whereby, you know, a woman may feel to herself, oh, well, I don't want to maybe mention that I've even got kids because they're going to think that there's going to be a barrier, that I'm going to have this, that I will be less on the job, etc., etc. If you actually look at the person as, and not as, so was it Tim?
Yeah.
In terms of just these blunt, oh, just a woman or this or that or whatever, but actually look at the person in terms of the whole, and that could be, you know, it could be like, oh, I'm a mother, but I might be biologically or might not be biologically, but I'm a mother. So you're not looking at sort of just fine lines. Then you can have an honest, psychologically safe discussion with your manager, and they're 24 hours in the day, flexible working. Like, who really works 9 to 5? Like, you know, so it's you can move the environment. It doesn't have to be set in stone. Most companies that set themselves in stone become dinosaurs. So you know, the environment needs to move and can move and change when you have a safe environment where you could bring your whole identity, discuss it, and find a effective way of working so that these time constraints and things, you can work around them. I'll do these hours on that day or this day, or people know how to contact me, but I may not necessarily be sat at this desk at this particular moment, but it doesn't mean I'm not being most efficient. I'm just juggling my life around in a way that allows me to have a work-life balance and fulfill all my roles. And again, of course, as individuals, we are going to make choices. You know, we'll make choices about what companies we're with and where we stay. We didn't mention about retention. So for companies, you want to retain good staff, you know, you need to work with them. Yeah, your company are the people. Those are your most valuable assets. So you need to work with them. And intersectionality is a great lens to allow us to do that.
Thank you very much, Karen. And we have the second question was about psychological safety. Yeah. Robin?
It was a great question. And I mean, I think probably I can reveal a bit about my age. I can go back 30 years and think about probably when I was most struck by how psychologically unsafe an environment academia could be, which I hesitate to say this in this particular context, but was an RES conference that I went to in St Andrews. And I was a young, recent graduate, started working in the civil service, gone along. And I watched this sort of quaking graduate student present their work, and then watched unfolding horror as a senior grizzled academic took great pleasure in dissecting their work, rubbishing it, and humiliating them, frankly, in public. And I just like, I thought, right, I now know I do not want to go into academia. And then sort of fast forward 20 years, and I was I worked at the FCA, and I was the acting chief economist for a year or two, and the economics department had a lot of great things going for it. But part of that culture seemed to have imbued itself in the presentations that took place. And again, because people were coming from academia, they took great pleasure in ripping other people's work to shreds. And I was like, well, this is not great. And so I think there's a problem in the power dynamic, right? So you can't, it can't be the graduate students themselves who change this. It has to come from above to some extent. And so there's something about a conversation happening about, you know, is this really getting the best out of people in academia? And I suspect it's not. And so in terms of tips, I don't know. You can only really work within the environment that you are responsible for and you have some locus over. But I guess that we can do that locally within our own departments in workplaces or universities, and we can have a conversation about how we are going to conduct ourselves. And if everyone does that locally, then it can add up to something bigger. And I can talk about, you know, the sorts of conversations we've had to come up with the charter, and I can show you our charter, for example.
Thank you very much. Now you understand where our code of conduct comes from.
Yes. Yes.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you, Felix. Sorry, thank you, Robin. Felix.
And Felix.
Yeah, everybody. Yeah.
I'll be whoever you want.
Next question for Felix was about self-identity and from Tim.
Yeah, this is a fascinating question, and I'm afraid I could talk for too long on it. So I'm going to try and keep it simple and practical as well. It's very important that people are recognized for the identities they hold as they see them themselves. None of us like to be put in a box we don't feel we belong into. None of us like a label slapped on us that we don't identify with. It's also essential, as we've been talking about, to take an intersectional lens and recognize that we're not just the sum of the identities we hold, but the specific configuration of identities we hold. This is important. At the same time, it's practically challenging. When we think about things like collective action, that comes from recognizing commonalities, right? Many organizations lack the critical mass of members of underrepresented groups to make real change if they're all working separately. And this is why a lot of organizations, a lot of social change efforts bring people together into these broad categories. I think there's a way you can do that without erasing people's true identities. But I think it's a context by context situation where you look at who's present, who's not represented, and try and figure out what are the identities that are most salient, most problematic in this context, and then focus there. I also want to flip this point, though, and say that we can approach this another way. So what I'm talking about when I talk about prototypes, this in itself is intersectional as well, because prototypes encode a variety of identities. And people on all sorts of dimensions of identities are harmed by a narrowly defined prototype, but it's this common cause. Right? It's a common cause of bias along the lines of race and gender and the intersection of race and gender and sexuality and class and so on. And so I think focusing on that common cause of these issues, we have a too narrow a definition of what it means to be one of us, and we keep enforcing that against our best interests. I think that's another way to address this that doesn't force us to put people into these multiple levels of categorization, and it's just going to be impossible to do that in a way that ever feels kind of accurate and complete because it'll just get too complex. The last thing I'll say as well, in terms of flipping this on its head, is so much of what we're forced to do is justify diversity in organizations. I think the onus is on justifying homogeneity. Homogeneity, so many of the benefits of diversity are really taking away the harms of homogeneity. Groupthink, right? Lack of creativity, just cutting to the chase, no, not deliberating over things because we just assume we're all the same, all thinking the same, right? I think oftentimes when people ask about what are the benefits, the selling points of diversity, it's good to go back and ask, okay, what's the justification for homogeneity? What's the justification for a lack of diversity? We live in a diverse world. It takes effort to make organizations that are not diverse. And so I think that's another way in which we can kind of avoid some of these complications of like, oh, we got to target these very specific groups, and you get lost in debate. When I think, if we just look at what the problem is, it's a lot simpler.
Thank you very much. I'm going to take another round of questions. So we have one here, one there, and one at the front. So good. Here first. Remember to say your name and your institution. Yeah.
Hi, my name's Falsa Shah. I'm an independent economist in international development. As a question to Felix, actually just what you were talking about in the last point. So there's two reasons. Obviously the moral ground, diversity, equity, inclusion, of course, for the moral reasons of including everyone, but also that other reason of actually, what about the benefits, the economic benefits of diversity, given the way that politics are going in the United States in particular, but also here as well, actually? Do you think we should be focusing more on the economic benefits of diversity and promoting that research more? I see in my work now in international development, there's this whole movement of the decolonization of aid, which is going down that route of seeing the benefits of really having a lot more diversity and using people in country, and actually the benefits to the work and the programs, not just for moral justice reasons.
Thank you very much. We have a question here as well.
Fantastic panel. Thank you for your candidness. Anisha Taylor, I'm head of EDI here at Ofcom, 2 months into my role, so don't quiz me on it, please. Previous to this, I was head of diversity, inclusion and belonging at the BBC. My two things, and one just almost to strengthen one of Robin's points just he made around psychological safety, and to the question that I think came from the other side of the room, is around the kind of psychological agency, which is around, the ability for individuals to make a choice about how much of themselves that they want to bring to work. And then my question to Felix, if that's all right, is around your element of around prototyping, which is again fascinating. Have you got any hints and tips for organisations? And when I ask this, I'm not talking about Ofcom, by the way, but organisations who perhaps are wedded to their job descriptions, which is, as you mentioned, is one way that they can, that things manifest in the sense of, well, this is what we want and we're kind of sticking to it and we're not moving away from it. How do we get them to think differently? Because they will always turn around and say, well, we've done it, it works, so we're going to stick to it. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we had Andy here.
Hi, yeah, I'm Andy Ross. I'm a mid-career economist, and I wear a lot of hats. But yes, it's something both Ben and Robin said in your multiple roles. It was on the about economics becoming an elitist subject, in a sense, which both is in schools. And it's funny, I've been invited to expensive fee-paying schools to speak, and universities, but not really state schools at all. I was chatting to the waitress in my favourite taverna, and she's studying economics, and she said, for a year they didn't have, the teacher went, they didn't have an economics teacher, and now the geography teacher stepped across to fill in the economics. And she still didn't understand why marginal cost cuts average cost at the minimum point, because her teacher said it just does, right? So I then explained to her, and then pointed out, as a good economist, my hourly rate is far more than hers, so she now owes me a tip. But apart from that, we've got people from Discovering Economics here. But I mean, are we losing on that front? What's happening? I don't know. I know there used to be Tomorrow economist organisations. I think that's folded. It's gone. But are we making progress, or is it just now becoming more and more this fee-paying, elitist subject?
I think I can address that, but we have one last question and I think this is going to be the last round of questions. So I'll just take the question for Nuha as well, so we can go back to the panel. But thank you.
Thank you. My name is Nuha. I'm an economic analyst, well, formerly a health economist. I'm now working in policy with Department of Health and Social Care. This is a question for Felix, and also building on a question earlier. We think a little about intersectionalities and also not wanting to bring them to the workplace. I know in some organizations, DEI, EDI has become a word that is used as part of what we're going to do, but it takes a really long time. And I've spoken to a lot of colleagues in former places of employment where they're tired of bringing their many hats to work because nothing changes. So it's really important to think about how, we not just celebrate them, but we actually do good on what we're saying that we're going to do in an organization. In line with the exercise that you carried out with the firefighters, I'd be interested to hear about how you can take that and apply that to organizations so that that kind of uncoupling and recognition of different roles actually materializes into change so that people do feel celebrated and no longer want to be excluded from any kind of conversation on EDI because they're tired of it.
Thank you very much, everybody, for your questions. So I'm going to start with Felix this time, if that's okay. I think you have a few pieces around, yeah.
I'll try and catch all of them, but all great and kind of overlapping questions. So first question was kind of around this business case for diversity. We're seeing a lot of pushback. Should we be doubling down on that? I think we can do a better job, and we need to do a better job of articulating the business case for diversity, but I don't think that alone will do the trick. And there's kind of emerging research about how the business case for diversity makes people from non-dominant, underrepresented backgrounds feel, well, it feels instrumental, right? Like, oh, you're just bringing me on board because you think it's going to bring more profits. And then, I think many organizations do see it as like a nice to have that they quickly abandon the moment things get tough. So I don't think we should abandon the business case for diversity as long as kind of the research backs it up. But I think we need to complement it with a stronger case for kind of the justice case for diversity. And with that, kind of a recognition about the distribution of opposition to this, right? There are some people who are just kind of confused by DEI. They don't really see the point, and they can be reached with more education. There are other people, I'll point to the administration in the US, right, who just have a very different moral compass, right? A lot of the arguments for DEI rest on concerns about harm and fairness, and not everyone sees harm and fairness as kind of important moral principles, right? They just don't. And that's kind of the reality of the world, living with people who have different morals. And so I think it's important to have multiple arguments ongoing, right? Kind of a plurality of cases for diversity, but also mindfulness of who we're trying to reach, right? There's some people who I think will be extremely difficult to reach. Some people who just need some engagement that's more than just a mandatory training, when there's very little evidence of the effectiveness of those. And some people who want to have kind of a more nuanced debate and want to get into the, okay, it is actually difficult to see the benefits of the business case of diversity. It doesn't always show up. It requires it to be well managed. And we want to think about, the pros and cons, the fact that the benefits of diversity actually come from the fact that it makes people work harder and think more and question their assumptions and these kind of things. And so, again, I think it's kind of multiple messages that need to go out, and we need to move beyond this reliance on just the business case. Does that answer your question? Yeah. But with also the actions of very morally motivated people pushing for that as well, right? Right. I think any social change you've seen, kind of a confluence of people motivated by different reasons pushing for it. Economic argument sometimes is what people most reluctant to adopt that change take on, but it's not the only argument, and it shouldn't be the only one, I think.
Thank you. I think we have one more about the job descriptions in particular.
Yeah, job descriptions and like how to actually make this stick, right?
Yeah.
Because I think this is really tricky. Job descriptions in particular, the research is mixed, like whether or not those really matter. There is some research that showed, if you take out the stereotypically masculine language on job descriptions, that gets more women to apply. And there's been some evidence of that. Also some evidence saying, maybe not. Maybe people just don't read job descriptions. They're all kind of generic, and people searching for a job, you're just applying to any job, not really reading the full thing, right? And so I think there is a gap between, kind of what's the practices that encode or express the prototype that are on paper and the ones that are actually guiding people's thinking, right? And I think if we look kind of below the surface, these are kind of like surface level artifacts of culture, right? These lists, and we look towards like, okay, who are people seeing rising up in the ranks? Who are the kind of photos on the wall, the list of founders, right? The main photos on the website? Who are the people who are being invited to speak, right, at major events? These are the kind of things that more subtly shape people's prototypes, right? And so diversity efforts themselves are a way of changing prototypes because people learn them inductively through observation, right? And so you can get into, I think, Robin, you talked about this like virtuous cycle where by changing the composition of an organization, sometimes in the face of resistance, you can get success stories where people don't expect to see them, and that changes these expectations. It changes their underlying prototypes in subtle ways, in ways that take a long time, but that's something that can also happen, I think is essential to happen, in addition to kind of more top-down changing of practices, looking at like, hey, we have this requirement about how women can style their hair, right? Was a requirement in many organizations for a long time, not really relevant to business success, targeted, systematically disadvantaged Black women in particular. And they just got rid of that in most organizations, and it's only for the better, right? I think there's a lot of these kind of assumptions that encode kind of dominant groups, unnecessarily narrow the prototypes, that with just a careful review of, what are we really valuing here, would reveal, hey, we're really overemphasizing some things that don't matter, underemphasizing some things that do. That's going to face resistance from the people who benefit from the current system, right? I rose to the top. This must be the legitimate system, right? Because I'm worthy here, right? Those people are going to be unhappy about changing it. But if you can get them on board, if you can show evidence, if you can make as many cases as possible, figure out what appeals to them, I do think change is possible.
Thank you. And Robin, do you have a last thought about the psychological agency? And I think I can address Andy's question.
The psychological agency being the ability to bring the bits of you that you want to the workplace. Yeah. I mean, I think that is really important, and it is important to distinguish between sort of bringing how much you need to reveal about yourself, and an assumption that diversity is full transparency. That's not what it's about. It is about creating the environment that enables us to thrive as who we are in the workplace, and that does mean bringing the bits we want to bring to the workplace.
Thank you. Karen, do you want to add some final word?
Thanks. Yeah, so I'll just go through a couple of the points that was raised. So in terms of what you're saying in terms of the economic case, I think that we definitely agree with you, Felix, that, yes, it is a matter of changing the mindset, getting into that protocol and changing what that looks like. But I think we need a multi-pronged approach. And I think that with any sort of movement of change, playing on self-interest, it's in your interest, especially when it is evidentially true, is definitely a strong way to go. It's like, again, when we look at migration, for example, or immigration, looking at the economics of migration and realize that it is a positive, it can make a positive change, and sort of drumming, banging that drum is one way. Because again, in terms of fake news, I think we suffer very much into the DEI. I think we suffer from the same kind of negative false truths in terms of, is this person here on their own merit, or have they been helped? Or so are they actually disadvantaged with them being here? So if we can turn that around with the evidence that diversity actually improves things, there's positive economic benefits from diversity within organizations, then I think that's definitely going to be the way to go. On a multi-pronged sort of approach. Totally agree in terms of what you said in terms of agency. I think though, for me talking on a personal basis, I think for too long of my career, I possibly was a case of having to leave too much of myself at the doorstep. So now I'm kind of like, I'm glad I've got a choice, or maybe I could actually not tell them everything now. But I think that it was been much more the other way around in terms of, you know, like how much do we have ourselves, do we have to leave behind? That's just talking in terms of a personal basis. On to your point on the schools, when I've said too much, just call the can on me. But I think we've
30 seconds.
30 seconds. Okay. I think we've gone backwards in terms of the schools, lots of issues. Since economics is not taught at GCSE, it comes in really late. We had a taster where, you know, the students could get involved at AS levels. AS went. That is a big backward move. It's such a gamble to commit to a whole A level when you don't really know the subject. That's a big thing. Economics teachers are in extremely short supply. I know of schools, I won't call them out, where, you know, the maths teacher is like, oh, I'm teaching economics now. Really? Business teachers. Yeah, it's a problem. Did I do that in 30 seconds? I think I did.
Thank you very much. And just to add on that, I think, like, yes, as all what Karen said, I couldn't say it better, but I think there has been some movement, and I'm really, really proud. This was my pride moment last week, that when I saw the Bank of England recognizing that this was a problem, and actually a lot of it came out. We wrote, and some of my co-authors are here, we wrote a report about the socioeconomic background, the lack of socioeconomic representation in economics a couple of years ago. And since that report has gone around, has reached the Bank of England. They did their own investigation. They say, yeah, we don't have enough socioeconomic background. This is what we are going to do. And they launched, and now they're going to be training teachers with the University of Manchester, and they are supporting Discovery Economics. So, I mean, it takes time sometimes, but we are getting there. So to my co-authors, you see, I make you work, but it was worth it in the end. So I think it's moving. It's slowly, but it's not all depending on us. But I'm really happy to say that.
Can I just say, no, I'm 100% on that. It was a moment that took us backwards, but definitely I must a correction on that. If it was in, I recognize the extremely hard work, and I'm always putting my thumbs up and hearts and all the wonderful things that are going on in that space. And I'm really mindful of that.
Thank you very much. And with this, I want to say thank you to our panelists. Thank you very much for sharing all your insights.